All right. Your questions have been typed to make it a little bit easy for us to read. There are 11 pages of questions, and there are 90 questions in all. And some are pretty long, about 7-8 lines. We tried, a number of you helped a great deal last night to put these things together in some order. And I have asked Bahia to be here so that she will read the questions, so that I don't have to read as well as give some answer. Thank you very much. On the whole, I would say that there were a number of questions which were very, very good and showed that you were seriously interested in these subjects and you were exploring new aspects of the matters that we discussed together. But I was a little bit disappointed that there are some questions which were very superficial. There were some questions which we had already discussed here, matters that are in your notes, very clearly stated, I thought, that are asked. Some of these questions, for example, here, this thing that, I don't know how many years ago it was that I was here, and this little booklet, Question Time, was prepared, and it's, I think, on sale. Many of the questions here have already been asked here and answered, and the booklet is here. And of course there are all the books and all the literature that we have. So you'll excuse me if some of the answers that I will give will be very, very brief, because of the time and because of the nature of the question. There were some questions which were purely private, personal, and really of no interest to the whole group. So these questions we will not read at all. And later during the day you can contact me or Violette and ask these very, very personal questions if you wish. Okay, now we will start. I must also say that some of the questions we'll try to put 2 or 3 questions together because they are all related, especially the first 3.
We know the beginning of the process of disintegration is the year. We know the beginning of the process of disintegration is the year 1844. How can we respond to people who argue that the evidence of disintegration, the decadent events in history, have been occurring from before 1844 and therefore don't accept the Baha'i view? Will destruction and integration, according to the idea given by the 2 lines, always coexist? Does this mean that also in the Baha'i civilization there will be destructive events? In these days we've been talking about the 2 processes of disintegration and integration. My question is, do they always coexist since the beginning of the human history? Or is this something that belongs only to the Baha'i cycle in order to establish the world order of Baha'u'llah? Why has New York City been chosen as Okay.
Yes, these 3 questions are very closely related, as you can see. Basically, this idea of integration and disintegration, of course, existed before 1844. It is, you think about the word disintegration, think of another word like decline, or another word like decay. Maybe decay would be a good way of thinking of these things. When you have in a forest or in a garden, you have certain branches that have fallen down, or even some of the parts of a certain tree are decaying. This is this is what is happening in the world. It is because of the decay in the world, the decline in the world, that the prophets or the messengers appear. God sends them because the disintegrating process does exist before the appearance of the manifestation of God. But what happens when a manifestation of God appears? He does not stop, his appearance does not stop the disintegration. His appearance accelerates the process of disintegration. Just as the sun, when it rises, if something is decayed, it dries it up. So it is accelerating, it is speeding up this whole process of decay so that it will completely disappear. As to the question whether disintegration and integration do exist in previous manifestations and previous dispensations, yes, they do, and they will continue to be like this. This is a general principle, that there is disintegration always in the world, but this term has not been used as such. This concept has not been clarified in the way it is, because it was localized, it was for a country, it was for a region. But because now we are talking about the whole planet, the whole civilized world, and the entire human nature, human race, this is why now it has become so dramatic. And so we express it in such ways that catch the imagination. But in essence, this is something that has always existed in the past and will continue to exist. The scale is different.
Why has New York City been chosen as the city of the covenant? Can that in a way be considered as similar to Jesus Christ's choice of Rome for the center of Christianity? Shall we expect the crumbling of the American empire?
Jesus Christ did not choose Rome. This developed like that. However, the reason why New York City has been called the city of the covenant is because when Abdul Baha was in New York, he very clearly, to a group of very close American friends, particularly Juliet Thompson, he clearly excuse me, he very clearly announced himself and declared his station, unveiled his station as center of the covenant. He made that very clear. This is why it became the city of the covenant, because in the United States he was regarded as the son of Baha'u'llah, more or less a kind of a spiritual leader and so on, but the real meaning, the true meaning of his station was not clear until he himself disclosed it, unveiled it. And it was in New York City that he did this, and this is why it became the city of the covenant. Personally, I don't think it has any relationship with the crumbling of the Roman Empire, or to think that anything like this is related to the situation that happened in New York with 9/11, or that something similar to that has to happen in Chicago or in New York once again.
In last year's material, it is written that in the story of religions, conversion never happened by means of force, at least during the life of the manifestation. What is then the meaning of jihad mentioned in the Quran? Did Muhammad use violence to convert people?
You see, the question here about that coercion has never been used in past religions is in the writings of the Bab. If you read the writings of the Bab, that volume of the selections from the writings of the Bab, you find that there. And it's based on that in last year's notes we included this point. What happened in Islam is, as explained by Abdul Baha in some answered questions, in the chapter entitled Muhammad, at the beginning of the book. The campaigns engaged by Muhammad, military campaigns, were all defensive, not offensive. So jihad has two categories, two types. One is defensive, one is offensive. When the people of Mecca arose, and while he was peacefully settled in Medina, came to attack him and his followers and his family, this is when he started this idea of defensive jihad. It was after the passing of Muhammad, and particularly because of the lack of a center of covenant and strength of the covenant, that defensive jihad deteriorated and became offensive jihad. So that is the situation about the question of jihad. What the Bab says, that there is no coercion, this will continue to be throughout eternity. The manifestations of God come, is the free choice of the individual to accept or to reject.
Is it true that Shoghi Effendi envisaged the state of Israel to further expand and gain even more territory over its neighboring countries?
You see, this is why I told you that if you get these CDs, you should not circulate them indiscriminately. For example, this question is being recorded now, and it will go around. So this is why you have to be careful. I have to give some answer to this, obviously. Whatever you have heard, my dear friend, is not in the writings, in the clear stated writings of Shoghi Effendi. Nothing. This is what some pilgrims have reported. Pilgrims' notes. They may have understood, they may have misunderstood what Shoghi Effendi said. Second point is that when the State of Israel was formed in 1948, you can check the messages of Shoghi Effendi, published messages. You will see that Shoghi Effendi at that time sent a message to the Baha'i world that the establishment of the State of Israel in 1948 was the fulfillment of the promise given to them in the Bible. This is what he has on record, which is in contradiction to what is being reported here as a Pilgrim's note.
Are the religious courts destined to be established in Eastern countries meant to just be one function of the NSA LSAs, or are they meant to be a separate institution? Then there is a second question related to religious courts. Could you please give us more information on the Baha'i religious courts in terms of their future function and jurisdiction? Are they going to be separated from the local and national assemblies, or will they be executing their function together with these assemblies?
The idea of establishing religious courts is that the assembly itself, whether local or national, will become a religious court on the local level or the national level. So, for example, as I explained to you about publishing trusts, the publishing trust is the National Spiritual Assembly, basically. But it establishes itself, reincorporates itself as the Baha'i Publishing Trust because it has a specific activity. It's the same thing here. The local assembly and the national assembly reincorporate themselves, are recognized by the civil authorities as courts, as religious courts. Now, this does not mean necessarily that these assemblies will actually deal with divorce cases, with disputes between individuals and so on. Of course, if it's a small community, they will do it. But when the community becomes large, and there are more believers, which means there will be more differences and more disputes and more divorces and more so on. So already in the days of Shoghi Effendi in Tehran, in Iran, because of the great number of Baha'is in the country, and particularly in the city of Tehran, the local assembly of Tehran was obliged to have special committees, and these committees were more or less like courts. So they chose, let us say, 2 or 3 outstanding Baha'i lawyers, and there are many lawyers among the Baha'is in Tehran, and they constituted them as, let us say, Baha'i court number 1, Baha'i court number 2, another group, court number 3, number 4, number 5. So when cases were presented to the local assembly of Tehran, they would automatically be referred to one of these courts. And so if you were a party to a case of a difference that you had with somebody else, one of the believers, then you will go to that small group of 3 Baha'i lawyers who will deal with your case on behalf of the local spiritual assembly. So when we say that a local assembly will become a court, it does not mean that necessarily they have to sit down and judge in every case. They can delegate this responsibility to committees, or what we call subsidiary agencies that we may call even a court if we want to.
What is the Baha'i view of theocracy in relation to a Baha'i form of governance? How do we as Baha'is, on the basis of our holy writings, envisage the future system of the government of the world? Is it our vision that the universal house of justice will be the world government in the golden age? And if it is so, how can we convey this very delicate subject to European intellectuals who, because of historical reasons, are very skeptical about a theocracy, as it would be under a universal house of justice, which is the supreme political body of the world?
This idea of theocracy, if we say theocracy means krasi is the government, theo is God, so it's government by God, democracy is government by the people, and so on and so forth. Autocracy is one, aristocracy is a group. So theocracy is God's government. So if we say that the Baha'i system is a theocracy, it's not wrong. If we say that the Baha'i system is not a theocracy, it's also not wrong. Why? It's because how we use the word theocracy. Theocracy in the general understanding is not something very popular, because it has a whole system of professional clergy as part and parcel of that theocracy. The Holy Roman Empire, with its seat in Rome, was a theocracy, but it had a whole system of bishops and archbishops and cardinals and whatnot, and still does. So this we do not have. So from that point of view, we are not a theocracy in the sense that it is understood in that sense. However, in the theoretical sense, in the general sense of the term, it is a theocracy because it has been founded by God, by the manifestation of God. It has been further interpreted by 2 successors, Abdul Baha and Shoghi Effendi, both authorized. And therefore, this system it is attributed to God. From that point of view, it is correct. But we don't have all the appendages, the accessories that are usually, which usually accompany these theocracies.
These are some questions related to the Golden Age. Will the beginning of the Golden Age coincide with the Most Great Peace? Is the Golden Age still part of the dispensation of Baha'u'llah? And on page 7, is the stage of suffusion linked to the greater peace, the Sulh Akbar, as a result of the spiritualization of the masses?
Confused me by putting all these things.
Well, we can leave the last one. It's just the first two. The first, yes. Will the beginning of the Golden Age coincide with the Most Great Peace? Is the Golden Age still part of the dispensation of Baha'u'llah?
The Golden Age is, of course, part of the dispensation of Baha'u'llah. I'm surprised that this question has been asked. On the other thing. What is it now?
It's the very first one. Will the beginning of the Golden Age coincide with the Most Great Peace?
Yeah.
If you look at it, you'll see.
When you have read all these things together, I'm all confused.
I'm going in accordance to number 3. First one.
Here. Yes. The beginning of the Golden Age will coincide with the Most Great Peace, period. Yes, that understanding is correct. The Most Great Peace and the Golden Age are together. Yes.
Why is the formative age also called the age of frustration in the world?
Yes. Shoghi Effendi uses this term, the age of frustration, and it is mostly applicable to the formative age. But when you read his exact words about the age of frustration, you see that he is saying that even before the beginning of the formative age, with the beginning of the First World War, the age of frustration began. You see? Shoghi Effendi attached a great deal of importance to the First World War. Again, in God Passes By, he points out that the First World War was the first stage in the convulsions and the commotions that Baha'u'llah predicted. Remember, he was writing this in God Passes By in 1944, when the Second World War was on. The Second World War was the second stage in the convulsions and the derangement of the equilibrium of the world that Baha'u'llah had predicted. Now, whether there will be a third stage, a third world conflict, no one can 100% say. But in Shoghi Effendi's letters, I must say that after the end of the Second World War, there is a letter from Shoghi Effendi in which he says that he sees reasons that there may well be a third world conflict. That is in print in Citadel of Faith. So these are the periods that Baha'u'llah had in mind, and it is more specialized for the formative age, but it actually began during the heroic age with the First World War in 1914. That age of frustration, when the humanity realizes that what it thought it could achieve, it cannot achieve. That its hopes have been completely there's disappointment, there's frustration about the aspirations that humanity had for happiness and welfare.
What, in your opinion, will the next plan be like?
I don't know. Nobody knows. I did refer to the next plan, but if you remember the House of Justice, when at the beginning of the first year at the beginning of the 5-year plan, they wrote a letter in which they said that they see a period of 20 years ahead, from the year 2001 till the year 2021. They see this period as a period when we should be moving forward in anticipation of the 100th anniversary of the inception of the formative age of the faith, the 100th anniversary of the passing of Abdul Baha. So they are thinking in terms of a series of plans from 2001 till 2021. The 5-year plan is the first, and it's going to be followed by several other plans. But what the specific goal of the second plan will be, the one to follow the 5-year plan, only the House of Justice today knows. But because they have said that the 5-year plan has been formulated in anticipation of the advancement of the entry by troops process, to me there is no doubt, as I told you in one of my comments yesterday, that this new plan will be very closely associated with this stage of entry by troops that Shoghi Effendi speaks about, and that Baha'u'llah anticipated in his tablet to Nasruddin Shah.
In the Kitab al-Aqdas, we find the rulers of America being addressed with the words, "Take ye advantage of the day of God." Does this refer to the opportunities enjoined upon them by the Master in the Divine Plan?
I doubt very much that this is the case. I think when Baha'u'llah is saying, "Take ye advantage of the day of God," the day of God here is, as I told you before, the word day of God has two meanings. One is the ministry of the manifestation himself, and one is his dispensation. That means either the 39 years of his ministry or the 1,000 years of his dispensation. This could mean both, but I think it means the second. It means the dispensation. Take ye advantage of this particular special dispensation. That means turn your hearts and minds to the cause of God. This is what it means.
What happened to the tablets of the Divine Plan? They haven't been heard of in terms of executing them for ages. We've been in their second epoch for a long time. Are they somehow on hold? What are the features of the second epoch?
Yeah, I think here we are talking about that sketch where we show that the tablets of the Divine Plan were written in 1916-17. They were kept in abeyance for 20 years, nothing happened. And then in 1937, the first epoch of the tablets of the Divine Plan began. And now he himself said that in 1963, the first epoch will end. So after 1963, the House of Justice now has to decide when the second epoch of the tablets of the Divine Plan will end. And it has not yet decided. But I think that if you reread this question of diffusion and penetration and suffusion, it has to do with that particular letter of Shoghi Effendi, which I am sure the House of Justice will refer to this passage and in their decision, or will be considering this passage in their consultations about when to end this epoch. Whatever they say, whatever they decide is of God, and we will welcome it with heart and soul.
Could you summarize the essential character of the first 4 epochs of this age?
You know, this thing we discussed quite often. Briefly, the first epoch of the formative age, as you know, ended with the first 7-year plan. Therefore, the second epoch started when the entire Baha'i world now was boiling, was active in teaching plans. This is why it was a new thing in the entire Baha'i world. The end of the second epoch of the formative age was fixed by Shoghi Effendi himself before he passed away. Why? Because he knew that was the time when the Universal House of Justice will be formed. So the administrative order will have its dome. So it was the logical thing to do, to have a new epoch. The epoch after that, the third epoch, was announced by the House of Justice. Why? As I explained to you, it was because in 1986, which was the end of the third epoch, the House of Justice said, until now, all national goals have been given to national assemblies from the World Center, from whether the time of Shoghi Effendi or the Universal House of Justice. However, from now on, from 1986 onwards, goals have to be adopted by national assemblies themselves in consultation with the councillors. This was a new stage of development for this process of maturation of national assemblies. The House of Justice decided that this had to be a new epoch. The fact that in 2001 they started again another epoch was because of what we know, we are so familiar with now, that we did not have before. Teaching institutes, study circles, clusters. In many countries we have regional councils now that we did not have before, which was another feature of this new epoch. So all these things combined, the House of Justice felt that it was the time to start a new epoch. Now this will, of course, will continue. How long, we do not know. It may be till 2021, but this is only a guess.
Why did Shoghi Effendi, in his letter of April 1946, announcing the launch of a second 7-year plan, state that there would be 3 years of respite following this plan and preceding the third 7-year plan, and then replace this with the 10-year crusade?
No one can read the mind of Shoghi Effendi, but Shoghi Effendi, this is not the first time that he has done a thing like this. The British National Assembly started their 6-year plan in 1944, and they ended it 6 years later in 1950, and they thought now Shoghi Effendi was very pleased with them, they can relax. As soon as they've had this feeling that they can rest now and have a respite, Shoghi Effendi said, only 1 year. And immediately after that he gave them a 2-year plan to go to Africa and open Africa. So you see, he did the same thing with India. India also finished its first teaching plan. He immediately urged them to have another one, although they were thinking they were going to have a respite. Now, why Shoghi Effendi did this with the American community? That means as they were launching the second 7-year plan, he tells them, carry out the second 7-year plan. Upon its success will depend the third 7-year plan. But this third 7-year plan, he wanted that the third will end in 1953, which was the very year, 1963, which was the very year that the 10-year crusade ended, you see. So he told them a third step, because they were used to this idea of 7-year plan, 7-year plan, 7-year plan. But just about 2.5 years before the end of this second 7-year plan, He told them, no respite. We're going to have, instead of a 7-year plan, not only for you, but for the entire Baha'i world, we are going to have a 10-year plan. So we'll have to scrap the 3-year period of respite. Okay.
Mr. Nakhjaváni said that after the 2 points in time coincide, i.e. the minor and the major plan come together, there will be a turning towards the faith and there will be mass conversion. The 5-year plan now is to prepare for mass conversion. If I am right, does that mean the coinciding point is actually near?
Of course, you know by now, because of maybe this question was written before, that the 5-year plan is not to prepare for mass conversion. It is to prepare for entry by troops, which is a different situation than mass conversion. If individual conversion is 1 at a time, 2 at a time, 10 at a time, 40 at a time, this is individual conversion. Mass entry by troops, Shoghi Effendi makes particular reference to Christianity. He says that Constantine arose to champion the Christian faith when he saw that 1/5 of his Roman Empire had become Christian. 1/5 is 20%. So it should be around 20% is what is expected of the Baha'i world for this stage of entry by troops. And then mass conversion is of course far more than 20%. It goes between 80, 90, 95%. That is when mass conversion will take place, which is mysterious, which is unexpected, which is divinely propelled and divinely executed. Okay.
The next question has been already answered by the people who kindly typed up the questions. The question is, the Bab means gate. Why is that if he's the starting point of the new era? Answer by Shoghi Effendi, God passes by, page 100.
So do you mean to say I should not answer it?
No, I'm saying they've put that.
Well, just read to me the question, please.
Why is it that if he's the starting, why is he called the gate if he's the starting point of a new era? This is on the top of page 4.
Here. Well, why is it that what is it?
Bab means gate.
Yes.
Why is that? If he is the starting point of the new era.
What's wrong with that? The Bab means gate, of course. It means that he is a gate to Baha'u'llah. Okay? What's wrong in his being a gate to other things as well? Alright, he's the gate to a new, whatever it is, a new era. So you see, let me just give you this picture. You have the Adamic cycle. It begins 6,000 years ago. Adamic cycle comes here. At the confluence of these two cycles stands one man, the Bab. This is the position of the Bab. He is at the confluence of this. This is not called the Babi cycle, nor is it called the Babi dispensation. It is the Baha'i cycle and the Baha'i dispensation. But he is right here at this confluence. You see? Now, he is 25 years old. And then this thing begins. Right? Now we come to the dispensation itself. It's not part of the question, but I'm trying to explain it to you so that it becomes clear. The Baha'i dispensation now begins. All right? It begins, we've got the heroic age, including the Bab himself, Baha'u'llah and Abdullah. Comes the end of the heroic age, 1921. Okay? there is a confluence here. There is a new formative age now. At this confluence, there is one man standing. It's Shoghi Effendi. He's at this confluence. He is opening now a new formative age. And this formative age is going to continue after these 36 years of his ministry into the stretches of time ahead, and you have the universal house of justice. And then it goes into the golden age, and then later on into a new dispensation. So here is the Bab now at this confluence. He is a gate, yes, he is a gate to Baha'u'llah, but he is also a gate for this new era, for this new dispensation. But as he is not only a manifestation of God, but he is also a herald to Baha'u'llah. This is why we call this the Baha'i cycle, because the supreme manifestation is Baha'u'llah, and the Bab is under the shadow of Baha'u'llah. Shoghi Effendi used to repeat this, that the shrine of the Bab on Mount Carmel is under the shadow of the shrine of Baha'u'llah. He used to tell the pilgrims, and he wrote it in his letters, that future kings, when they come, they will first visit the shrine of Baha'u'llah and then come and visit the shrine of the Bab. Because the shrine of the Bab is under the shadow of the shrine of Baha'u'llah. Okay.
You've just answered the next question. Why is it called the Baha'i era instead of the Babi era?
Okay.
Referring to the British edition of the Dispensation by Shoghi Effendi, pages 27 and 28, how do the statements of Baha'u'llah on his apprehension and fears for what the one after him shall suffer, and of the Bab on the process of rise and setting of the Sun of Truth that will have no end, harmonize with the concept of, quote, the day which shall not be followed by night?
Take the next question as well.
The next question you've already, it's gone into the free will and predestination. You told me to leave it for the rest.
No, read it here, it's connected.
If the universal house of justice will announce the coming of the future manifestation of God, how will humanity react according to the principle of the purity of heart? Isn't this the principle that always distinguished the righteous from the wayward?
All right. The question of the future manifestation of God, friends, whatever I have said has always been tentative, because I'm giving you my personal opinion. No one really knows how it's going to happen, when it's going to happen, under what conditions it will happen. When Baha'u'llah says that he has fears and apprehensions, it means to me that there will certainly be opposition, because it is true, Baha'u'llah says so in the Kitab-i-Iran, that all manifestations of God will face opposition. But when I commented on this point by saying that the universal house of justice, Shoghi Effendi used to say, has the duty of recognizing the next manifestation and introducing the next manifestation of God, that the degree of opposition will be far less than before. This is the thing that we have heard from the Guardian. There will be opposition, but not to the same degree, not with the same intensity. All right. Now there is a tablet revealed by Baha'u'llah, which shows you how difficult it is to visualize the conditions under which the new manifestation will appear. He says, till now, the proof of the validity of the claim of the manifestations of God has always been the verses that they have revealed, the words that they have revealed. In other words, the revealed word, the creative word, has always been the proof. However, the proof of the next manifestation will be something else. Now, it is impossible for us human beings, with our finite minds, to visualize how this is going to be, or what it is going to be. So, this is why we do not know. This is what I told you about the degree or the intensity of opposition becoming less, is something that I told you we heard several times from pilgrims who asked this question, put this question to Shoghi Effendi. On the question of the covenant, this day shall not be followed by night, has two meanings. One meaning is the covenant, and Shoghi Effendi has attached this meaning to these words revealed by Baha'u'llah, to the covenant in God Passes By. If you refer to the index of the book, or you read the book carefully, or go back to the chapter that has to do with the covenant and Abdul Baha, you will see that I may have given a reference in my notes, I don't know, that this day that shall not be followed by night applies to the covenant. In other words, after the passing of Baha'u'llah, because there is a written covenant, then it did not happen as it happened in Christianity or happened in Islam, that there were divisions. In Islam there were Sunni and there was Shia and all this, because there was nothing in writing. But he says, because there is this in writing, that the cause of God is going to be united, remain united. For example, I think it is either in the Old Testament or the New Testament. My memory does not help me here, but it is certainly in the Bible, that when speaking about the future, we have a reference to the fact that the moon on that day will have the radiance and the brilliance of the sun. Now, the moon is referring to Abdul Baha. Shoghi Effendi describes the station of Abdul Baha as the moon of the Baha'i dispensation. Baha'u'llah is the sun, and Abdul Baha is the moon. And the moon, according to this prophecy, will have the brilliance of the sun, because it is Abdul Baha, the mystery of God, who has the perfections of the manifestation of God. In fact, in one of his tablets, Baha'u'llah refers to Abdul Baha as the sun, S-U-N. It is the tablet to Beirut, the land of Ba. In that tablet, you find that Baha'u'llah is referring to Abdul Baha as occupying the station of the sun, S-U-N. In other words, he is the moon, but so brilliant is he, so radiant, so luminous is he, that he has the brilliance and the light of the sun shining in him. So this is the distinction of this dispensation. Now, the same text, which is the day this is the day that will not be followed by night, again in God Passes By, he has quoted in another place, in an earlier page, in a position where, in a paragraph where he is referring to the glory of the dispensation of Baha'u'llah, and that's the time where he refers to the day of Baha'u'llah as the springtime, which shall not be followed by autumn, that you are now you realize that he's talking about the dispensation and not just the 39 years. The whole passage there is about the dispensation, the greatness and vastness of the dispensation of Baha'u'llah. He again quotes, "This is the day that shall not be followed by night." When I was on pilgrimage, one day Shoghi Effendi quoted this. "This is a day that shall not be followed by night." And then he clearly said, this applies also to the future manifestations that have to come. So that this dispensation is a special dispensation, which will have light upon light upon light. And it is going to be followed, after the formative age, we're going to have the golden age. What will happen after the golden age? This is all speculation. As I told you, for example, this tablet of Baha'u'llah about what will be the proof of the next manifestation, and he says it will not be the revelation of verses. It will not be the creative word anymore. What does it mean? I don't know. Nobody knows. This is a mystery. We have to leave these matters, these speculations, and concentrate on today and do our duty, carry out the responsibilities we have today.
There's a question that's very much like that, just one below. Why did the previous revelations of God not have, I suppose they're saying, such a strong written covenant, such as the Baha'i faith?
Well, probably because God wanted to give this special distinction to Baha'u'llah. I don't know. That's another mystery.
Why do we commonly use the word prophet in connection to our twin manifestations, knowing that technically this does not apply to them, since Muhammad was the last of those beings?
Yeah.
We find this too in Shoghi Effendi's writings, as well as the station of prophethood or their prophetic words when he talks about them.
Well, I can see the problem that the questioner has, but the word prophet, because it has a double meaning, it has a double usage. One is to prophesy, is to be a prophet, and one is a prophet, being a prophet of God, being a messenger of God, being sent by God. So this is how it is in English. It's used in English, and it's also used in Persian and in Arabic and in other languages, almost the same way. That a prophet is someone who prophesies and predicts about the future. From that sense, the prophetic era is finished. But from the sense that prophets are also messengers of God, that is continuous. It's progressive also. Yeah.
There's just time for one more before the break.
Yes.
And this last one is again connected to the previous one regarding the day that shall not be followed by night. Similar ideas. Since the Universal House of Justice is infallible, it will recognize the next manifestation of God. So, since the Baha'is must obey it, they will be told to turn to this future religion. Is this possible? Does this mean that the story of the next religion will differ from all other religions, for which it is very natural to have opposition and martyrs, etc.?
Yes. I think I've covered this point. Basically, I don't know.
In the Master's will and testament, I'm continuing with the question. In the Master's will and testament, he says that the choice of the new guardian should be confirmed by 9 hands of the cause. What would happen if the choice wasn't approved?
There is nothing in the will to tell us what will happen. Somebody asked Shoghi Effendi this question, and the answer has been published. He asked him exactly this: how is it that Abdul Baha gave this authority to the hands of the cause to disagree with the guardian? He says, the answer is this. He says, it is inconceivable that Abdul Baha would have included in his will and testament a provision which would lead to a conflict in authority. That was the answer he gave. In other words, there is some mystery here that you don't understand, because outwardly there is a conflict in authority. Shoghi Effendi appoints somebody, Abdul Baha says the hands should come, and it should be by secret ballot, and anybody is free to disagree with Shoghi Effendi. And it is secret ballot. So if there could be, conceivably, it could be that the majority would not agree with Shoghi Effendi. But here is the Guardian telling us this is inconceivable. So what did actually happen? It never happened. That was the thing. Shoghi Effendi never appointed anybody, never asked the hands to elect 9 from among themselves, and these 9 never, of course, met ever. So the whole process was completely shelved and set aside. So this never happened. So when Shoghi Effendi says it is inconceivable that Abdul Baha would have provided anything which would lead to a conflict in authority, probably by that he meant that because this thing is not going to happen ever, be sure, and Abdul Baha knew it, be sure that such a conflict will never occur. It could very well mean that. But in matter of fact, in the light of the facts that actually took place, we know that this stage never really materialized. Okay.
In the Baha'i faith, you should not bury somebody further away than 1 hour's travel from the point of death. The Bab was in a special situation, and it took years before he could be properly buried. What is the explanation given by Abdul Baha Shoghi Effendi and or by the Universal House of Justice for this? And there's an additional question, and are there certain rules for people who die in unavailable places, such as in oceans or while mountain climbing? Thank you.
In the case of the Bab's shrine, the Bab's remains, this was something very, very special, because the very legislator, the very source of law, Baha'u'llah, who had given us the Kitab Aqdas and the law about the one hour's journey, he himself instructs Abdul Baha to bring the remains of the Bab all the way from Iran so that those remains would be interred on Mount Carmel. So this is a very special case. And it was the will of Abdul Baha that was carried out. So he himself is the originator of the law, and he himself is the one who makes an exception to that law. However, the law remains. It remains binding on all of us, and we should observe the law about the 1 hour's journey. This was one of the laws that Shoghi Effendi in his own lifetime asked the Baha'is in the West to obey. There are other laws in the Kitab Aqdas that even the House of Justice today is not making it binding on the Baha'is in the West. For example, the law concerning the engagement period is only binding to the Baha'is of the East and is not binding still on the Baha'is of the West. So these things are gradual. However, this question of the hour's journey from the point of death and not carrying the body beyond that 1 hour's journey, this became binding in the days of Shoghi Effendi himself, just about 4 or 5 years before he passed away. About the other thing, that if it happens, if such a thing happens, naturally the logical thing is to consult immediately with the National Assembly closest to you, and they have guidance from the House of Justice, undoubtedly. Basically, what the House of Justice has said is that you bury the the body in the closest possible place. For example, if death happens on a ship, as soon as you arrive at the land, you bury your dead. You don't throw your body in the sea. You try to keep it and bury it to the closest place, to the closest cemetery. When there are, for example, if there is an avalanche or there is in the snow or something, you get to the closest place where there is a cemetery and you bury it. These things are specific cases which have to be referred to the national assemblies.
What exactly was the International Baha'i Council? What were its duties? Why did it not, as a forerunner of the Universal House of Justice, guide the Baha'i world after the passing of the Guardian to the end of the 10-year crusade? What happened to it after 1963?
Yes, the duties of the International Baha'i Council, as appointed by the beloved Guardian, was first to help Shoghi Effendi in building the shrine, completing the shrine, and in building later on the archives building, starting the building of the archives. So that was one duty. The other duty was to reinforce ties with the government of the country. The government of the country was Israel, and he wanted the council to build further bridges and reinforce ties with the newly formed state of Israel. And the third duty assigned to the council was to study the laws of affecting matters of personal status. I discussed this with you in connection with courts, and it was in matters of, for example, marriage and divorce and things like that, to see to what extent it is possible to get more prerogatives, more rights from the government of the land to the Baha'i community. Because already the right to perform, to solemnize Baha'i marriages had already been acquired by the Guardian himself before the appointment of the council. And he wanted them to explore possibilities. For example, the possibility of establishing a court in the Holy Land. And this was, of course, done. And as I told you, the result of this study was that it is impossible to have a court which would be equal to the religious courts of other religions. And therefore, it was decided that this was not possible at this time. Now, the other part of the question is, why was it that the International Baha'i Council was not leading the Baha'i world during the period of the interregnum? It is because Shoghi Effendi had, in his messages, in his last few messages to the Baha'i world, referred to the hands of the cause specifically as the chief stewards. He did not give this title to the International Council. He gave this title to the hands of the cause of God. And therefore, the highest, he called them also the highest ranking officials of the Baha'i community. And he did not confer such a title to the members of the International Baha'i Council. And therefore, it was the logical thing for the Baha'is of the world to turn to the hands of the cause as chief stewards. Yes.
Do you think that the concept of VI could be used by institutions today to encourage the Friends to arise?
Very much indeed. We don't do enough of it. I think the reason why Shoghi Effendi attached importance to newsletters, national newsletters, was precisely this, so that the National Assembly would be able to tell the Baha'is of the country, see what is happening in this part of the country, see what this local assembly is doing, see what this believer has done. This is drawing attention to what the victories that were being won by others. this was part of this, is part of this vying process. So the more of this is done, the better.
How did the NSA, for example, of Australasia or Central Africa meet at all? This is in relation to the previous.
When Shoghi Effendi had large areas, as I told you yesterday, he had two methods. One, when you had 2 or 3 countries together as one NSA, and then one would branch off and become a separate NSA. This was one. The other one, when there was a very big region, and it was then this, to establish national assemblies, it would go through 2 or 3 stages. It would break down into smaller units and finally into the independent national assemblies. So when the region was so big, Shoghi Effendi's advice was do your consultation by correspondence. In other words, try to meet once or twice, maximum 3 times a year for such a big region. The rest, do it by correspondence. But today, if such a thing should happen, it's very easy because we have all this internet and all these things. We did not have internet in those days, but we had cables, we had telegrams, we had airmail, and it was possible to have consultation between the 9 national assemblies by mail on all matters, so that in order to minimize the number of assemblies, meetings to be held, because the meetings were very, very expensive. To fly, to have 9 members from different parts of the region to come to meet, let us say, every 2 weeks would have been impossible. So it had to be done very rarely, 2 or 3 times a year, the rest by correspondence. And this was a temporary thing. It was an intermediary stage. Yes?
Is there any specific prayer or tablet the believers can offer for the institutions, local, national, as well as the Universal House of Justice?
My dear, you can offer any prayer you like, but certainly all these administrative bodies that you have named need a lot of prayers. I can assure you that. Pick up any prayer and read it in their name and pray for them.
How can we find the balance between keeping matters confidential on assemblies, on spiritual assemblies, and being unnecessarily secretive?
Yes, there is a difference between confidential and being secretive. Being secretive is that members of the National Assembly will never ever tell the Baha'is what they are talking about, what they are consulting about. This is being secretive. To have confidential matters is another thing. Baha'is have certain problems that are purely confidential. And they come to their national assemblies and they open their hearts to them, confide in them. So these are confidential matters. Usually very private matters, personal matters, are confidential matters. But then the work of the National Assembly should not be surrounded by secrecy, in the sense that national assemblies, any administrative body, should be very open. It is very interesting the way Shoghi Effendi treated this matter. For example, he was dealing with Mr. Rimi about the design of the temple in Kampala, or the temple in Sydney, or the temple to be built in Haifa. Here they were sitting at the dinner table. Shoghi Effendi had no time to meet Mr. Rimi separately. At the dinner table he would discuss with him all these things. So the other pilgrims would listen to all the points that went on between Shoghi Effendi and Mr. Rimi, between Shoghi Effendi and Mr. Leroy Ayawas. Mr. Ayawas would say, we have received a letter from such and such a country. What shall I answer? He would tell him what to answer in front of everybody, because it wasn't confidential. So there was no secrecy about it. The work of national assemblies should be open. The work of local assemblies should be open. This is why at a 19-day feast, for example, a local assembly should be very, very open about sharing with the community its problems, its concerns, its cares, its the state of the fund, any general situation, any difficulties that it's having with either the local government, let us say, or in the case of the National Assembly, meeting with the delegates at the convention. They have to be open. They have to share with the delegates the situation in the country. This is to avoid secrecy. The friends should know what is happening. But this is different from, as I was telling you, matters of confidence of individual people who have special problems, who go to national assemblies for assistance and guidance. Yeah.
When will the International Library be built on Mount Carmel?
The land on which the International Library is to be built has been clearly defined by Shoghi Effendi. The land now, if you go to Haifa, they will show you that the land now is a built-up area of series of blocks of buildings there, of flats and apartments. We have to first buy all these apartments, all these buildings in these blocks, then have permission to destroy them, then have permission to build our international archives, which should be facing exactly the archives building, our library to be facing the archives building. It's going to take some time. Nobody knows how long, but it's going to take many, many years before the library is built. In the meantime, there is the Universal Library, and it has its quarters in the building which is known as the Center for the Study of the Texts. That's where this International Library is housed. All the books are there, and they're being preserved under controllable conditions against humidity and about temperature and so on for preservation. But in the future, you know, it is not going to be very much, a lot of space is needed, because with the present computer business and all the developments in technology, you have all these things in small prints and films and all kinds of cassettes and so on, so that you don't really need to have all these books. But the books have to be there, because a book is a book and a film is a film. And we must have the books, and we must have space for them. But for easy access, you don't have to actually pick up the book. You can easily get to it through a very more elaborate ocean internet system. Okay.
What is the situation with the House of Baha'u'llah in Baghdad at the moment?
The House of Baha'u'llah in Baghdad, as it has been clearly stated by Shoghi Effendi in God Passes By, has not changed. It is still in the hands of the Shia clergy and is being used as a seminary. So it is not in our possession. It is our right to own it and to keep it and preserve it as a place of pilgrimage for the Baha'is. It has not, no damage has occurred to the building according to every report that has been received. But the time has not come, from what I understand, for action to be taken in order to recover the ownership of the building once again. There is no doubt that a day will come. It is true that the National Spiritual Assembly of Iraq has been reformed, and the Baha'is are active now. But this matter is not a matter of national importance. It is a matter of international importance. And therefore it will devolve upon the Universal House of Justice to take action about it, rather than the National Spiritual Assembly of Iraq. So when the time comes and the House of Justice considers it appropriate, obviously action will be taken universally and internationally.
Why did the Guardian ask the Baha'is to leave Israel? Was it for the development of the cause, or was it for political reasons in Israel?
It has nothing to do with political reasons in Israel. As I explained to you, it was in order to make the existence, the presence of the Baha'i faith in Israel to be purely and solely a Baha'i world center and not a local community. A time may come, I must say, a time will come when there will be a local community once again in Israel. There will be not only a community, there will be local assemblies undoubtedly throughout the whole country, just like any other country in the world. And there will undoubtedly be a national spiritual assembly also in the country. They will have their own national Hazirat al-Ghaws, their own local Hazirat al-Ghaws. And how wonderful it would be if one day we hear that the House of Justice is calling for pioneers to settle in Israel. Wouldn't it be wonderful? And we will rush and offer to be pioneers to go to Israel. But that is, I think, in the far future, in the distant future. We shouldn't worry about these things. We shouldn't speculate about these things. We should leave these things in the hands of Baha'u'llah. The time will come.
There are now some questions regarding teaching. What is our understanding of God? Could you give us some references about the concept of God, aside from those found in some answered questions and lights of guidance?
I think it's so important for Baha'is to be able to prove the existence of God. When Shoghi Effendi was asked by Baha'i youth, what are the subjects that they should study? The first thing he said was to know how to prove the existence of God. Second, how to prove the existence of the immortality of the soul. Third, how to prove the need of a manifestation of God to come from time to time. Fourth, what is the meaning of progressive revelation? These four subjects he picked up in one of his Pilgrim's notes when someone asked him, Baha'i youth, asked him, what were the subjects for Baha'i youth to master? The first thing was about God. We should know how to prove the existence of God, how to prove the existence of the immortality of the soul. And there are, as she says here, or he says, some answered questions is full of proofs on these subjects. Also in Lights of Guidance. But there is another book which I strongly recommend to you, which has these proofs fully pulled together and classified. And that is All Things Made New. All Things Made New by John Ferraby, The Hand of the Cause of God. It's a beautiful book. And it has a whole section on these subjects that Shoghi Effendi is talking about. Now, all you have to do is to refer to the index and find those pages and read those pages. Maybe in all it's about 10 pages, that's all, which cover all these points that Shoghi Effendi wants us to master and know. Because in our conversation with our professors, with our fellow students, with our friends, they mostly don't believe in God. So we have to know how to prove the existence of God. And these books have these proofs. Yes.
For those of you who didn't catch the name of the book, All Things Made New by John Ferraby. What can we do if someone who is not a Baha'i is drinking and in the meantime teaching the faith openly? Is this a threat?
My dear brother, you consult your auxiliary board member or the counselor of the area, and they will tell you what to do.
Why do you put so much emphasis on the improvement of our public speeches? Is the lesser peace at our doors?
I don't see the relationship of public speeches and lesser peace. My dear friends, this question of public speeches and standing up and giving talks, this is in the writings of Baha'u'llah. You know, sometimes we think that living the Baha'i life is enough. Living the Baha'i life is essential for the teaching work. Yes. In Iran, sometimes we are not able to teach the cause. So we find tablets in which Abdul Baha or Baha'u'llah tells us, all right, live the life, because that living the life is itself a proclamation of the faith. People see that you are different from others. But in the West, where there is freedom, it doesn't mean that we should only live the Baha'i life. It means that we should stand up and speak. And this is, you find in the writings of Baha'u'llah, stand up and speak up. Abdul Baha used to ask the youth in his own presence to stand up and give talks in Haifa at the Pilgrim house. Shoghi Effendi as a youth and his cousins and brothers were called upon by Abdul Baha to stand up in the presence of the Baha'is, the local Baha'is, and he himself sitting, to stand up and give a talk. He wanted the youth to be able to deliver speeches, because this is a tool that you have in order to be able to teach the cause. We should forget about our weaknesses, our limitations. We should trust in Baha'u'llah. How many times have we heard from Violette that Abdul Baha told Mrs. Maxwell, yes, you can do it. Stand up and speak and deliver the message. Turn to me and I will help you. We should turn to Baha'u'llah in prayer, and he will help us. If we find it easier to turn to Abdul Baha, turn to Abdul Baha and he will do it for you. You will go to Baha'u'llah and make sure that you receive the help that you need through the angels and the divine confirmations that are waiting. In one of the letters of Shoghi Effendi says that the hosts of the kingdom are sitting, waiting patiently to see who will arise in order to rush forth. He uses the word rush forth to come to the aid of the person who is now teaching the cause. This is a real thing. It's not an imaginary thing. We are not alone. This is a faith which belongs to Baha'u'llah. We do not belong to a club. We belong to a religion, God's faith, whose founder is saying, I will help you. I am there watching over you. I have my hosts, my armies, my angels at my command. I will send them forth. I have commissioned them to immediately come to your aid. This is the religion we belong to. And at the same time, in one stroke of his pen, he has abolished professional clergy. And he has put these responsibilities on my shoulders and your shoulders. How many times I have repeated myself during this last week on this point. This little pamphlet here, they've asked me about teaching so many times. If you read them, you find the answers to the whole question of teaching. Teaching is what I would call the panacea of Baha'u'llah for all ills and problems. Panacea means a cure-all, a medicine that is a remedy for all diseases. If you are timid, the remedy is teaching. If you have doubts, the remedy is teaching. If you see your community is not moving ahead, the remedy is forget about others. You teach the cause. If you see that the goals are not being accomplished on other fields, but if If you teach and you bring in new people into the cause, and you do your best through prayer, and you offer yourself to be an instrument in the hands of Baha'u'llah, you will change your community. Abdul Baha said, one person can change a whole country. Shoghi Effendi said the same thing about communities, that one active, devoted, selfless believer can change a whole community. You can change your community. You are agents that you can offer yourselves to Baha'u'llah, for Baha'u'llah to use you. And this cure-all, this panacea, believe me, is teaching.
I think you've just answered questions 7, 8, 9, and 10.
Bravo!
The next set of questions relate to covenant breaking. The beloved guardian writes that his translations of the holy writings will be improved in the future by scholars. I don't know why this is in this group, but anyway. The Persian believers claim that Shoghi Effendi wrote this out of humility. What do you think?
Yes. You see, the thing is this, that Shoghi Effendi was the interpreter. And it is true that Shoghi Effendi, when he released his translation of the Kitab-i-Iran, he said, this is one more attempt on his part, on the part of Baha'is, to put into English what should always be considered to be the matchless utterance of Baha'u'llah. Something to this effect in the preface was written by Shoghi Effendi. It is true. But if in the future some Baha'is would like to try, it should be with the approval of the Universal House of Justice. It cannot be that Ali Nakhjaváni suddenly decides to improve upon the work of Shoghi Effendi. If this foolish Ali Nakhjaváni would like to do something like this, he should first have the permission of the House of Justice. And the House of Justice will decide whether this is so or not. Shoghi Effendi was not only a translator, he was the interpreter. The importance of the translations of Shoghi Effendi is that he is interpreting for us what Baha'u'llah wanted to say. This is why it is very important for us not to treat Shoghi Effendi as, let us say, Marziya Gale or Habib Taherzadeh. We cannot do that. Shoghi Effendi's translations are of a different category. They are not only translations, they are interpretations. So all these things have to be taken into consideration. And then any changes that have to be done will have to be only and solely with the full approval of the Universal House of Justice. It's not for you and for me now to speculate on this subject.
The next two questions relate to Mason Remy, and in brief, they indicate, did Shoghi Effendi know that Mason Remy would become a covenant breaker? Was he preparing us for this problem that was going to occur after his passing? And why did he appoint him as the hand of the cause?
There were letters of the living who were appointed by the Bab who did not accept Baha'u'llah. The destiny of each one of us is in our own hands. We decide. God chooses us. God gives us the opportunity. If our failings, our weaknesses, our moral, ethical, spiritual weaknesses are stronger than our sense of duty and responsibility to God, then we fail. This failure is not because God wanted us to fail. God always wants every one of us to succeed. Always, at all times. But we fail basically because of our selfish motives. and I have referred to this matter so many times about our ego. It is this ego which works on us. The ego leads us to pride, leads us to jealousy, leads us to doing things in the wrong way, outside the spirit of the faith. And that's where we fail. Our failures are due to us, not because of God. Now God sees, of course, knows that this student is going to fail. But he gives assignments to all the students. And he may give an assignment specially to the student in order to help him. So it would be an opportunity for Mason Remy or whoever to develop. Now if Mason Remy does not do that, if this letter of the living does not do that, if one of the outstanding believers who may have a title from Baha'u'llah does not do that, some of the outstanding believers who were recipients of tablets from Baha'u'llah during the time of Abdul Baha became covenant breakers. The very son of Baha'u'llah, Muhammad Ali, who was not only the son of Baha'u'llah, he was appointed to be a successor to Abdul Baha. He broke the covenant. He could not raise himself to that level of self-denial, of self-abnegation, which is so important in order to be able to render service acceptable in the sight of Baha'u'llah.
I've just found 4 more questions, both in this group and in the group that is ahead, which all refer to the questions of the ego. May I suggest that you've just answered them?
Yes.
So we can jump the ego question.
Thank you very much. All right, carry on.
In the Will and Testament of Abdul Baha, written...
Which number is it?
We're on F.
All right.
In the Will and Testament of Abdul Baha, in the part written in 1907, he says, I am now in very great danger, and the hope of even 1 hour's life is lost to me. How can we correlate this sentence with the Master's superhuman knowledge? Didn't he know that he would continue to live?
Yeah. Well, he knew that he was going to live. Undoubtedly he knew, because he had this superhuman knowledge. But he was saying things based on facts on the ground, as they appeared to everybody. The outward seeming, the outward form of events as they existed. Outwardly, here was the committee of investigation. They had come. They had recommendations that he should be beheaded or exiled to Libya. This was the reality. They had gone to Istanbul for the signature of Sultan Abdul Hamid. This was the reality. So when Abdul Baha says, I am in grave danger, it's a reality. He also takes precautions. And maybe all these things happened so that he would be able to write the second part of his will, and in the second part of his will to give to the Baha'i world and to posterity the clear possibility that a universal House of Justice can be elected, can operate without the visible and the physical presence of the guardian of the Baha'i faith. Because he used this opportunity in order to state that, to give us the second alternative about the Universal House of Justice. So it may have been a God-given opportunity given to Abdul Baha to write a will, to write a second part of the will in a manner which is clear to everybody that under those circumstances he had to take such a precautionary measure. You see? It is difficult to speculate about these things. These matters have to be meditated upon by each one of us.
I might point out that some of these questions can be answered or meditated upon using the material of Acuto 2004. The letter of the House of Justice, dated 9th of March 1965. The quote is, from that onward point, Resvan 1963, unless the faith were endangered, further divine guidance was essential. Does this mean that if, in 1963, the faith was not endangered, no divine guidance would be essential?
Surely not. What the House of Justice is saying is that if we did not have divine guidance through the institution of the Universal House of Justice itself, which is after the Guardian now, after the 10-year plan now, then the faith would be endangered. This is what the House of Justice is saying. Yes, carry on.
There is also a question related to quotation references. Shoghi Effendi often quotes words, titles, expressions and sentences from the writings, in his writings and major letters. Many times we are not given the source of Shoghi Effendi's quotations. Is it easy to find them, as they may be useful when presenting some arguments?
Shoghi Effendi, when he was writing, and Abdul Baha likewise, when they quote from the writings, they don't give you the reference. They are not professors at the university to give you all the footnotes and so on. This is our job, to go and find these references. Shoghi Effendi was writing this history. This history is not itself a regular history. It's not a paper that he was going to present to a professor at the university. He was writing as guardian of the Baha'i faith, as interpreter of the Baha'i faith. And he was, whenever he put these quotations, there are some of these quotations are his own translation of one phrase from a clause, as Baha'u'llah was explaining to us, the phrase and the clause and the sentence. He would choose just 2 words, 3 words from one of the tablets of Baha'u'llah, translate those 2-3 words and put it in his God Passes By. It takes many, many scholars and many, many years of study finally to be able to find that particular tablet and that particular 3 words that he has quoted from that tablet. And the original is probably in Persian or in Arabic. It takes many years of study, and I can tell you that many, many scholars are working now on finding all these references. And a day will come when there will be a kind of a compendium, a kind of a paper that will be probably published, giving you whatever you are now asking, the references. But this is going to take a long time, and it takes a great deal of effort and research. Yes.
There are many questions on that page related to, will you please give me the reference to? And since it's now 11:10, I wonder if you permit me to jump into another sequence of the question. I don't know how you're going to cover all of this.
The microphone is in your hand at this point.
If you want me, I can continue.
Well, I'll try to give briefer answers.
Okay. Could you please compare and contrast the terms world government and superstate from last year's notes?
Where is it? Oh. Yes. World government could be either referring to the greater peace or the most great peace. Superstate is a term that Shoghi Effendi has used only for the greater peace.
There's a previous question which was missed, which is linked to the same subject on the previous page, number 650. Is the stage of suffusion linked to the greater peace as a result of the spiritualization of the masses?
I think that's a reasonable conclusion, yes.
The next question about elucidation and reference. Could you please elucidate why in the parable of the Lord of the Vineyard, the Lord of the Vineyard is a reference to Baha'u'llah? My understanding is that it's a reference to God.
Because Shoghi Effendi in God Passes By clearly states that this reference of this parable refers to Baha'u'llah. That is his interpretation.
Could you please give me the reference to your announcement that we should mention the name of Baha'u'llah at least once a day? Who says this?
This is Shoghi Effendi in a letter that is written on his behalf by the hands of the cause in the Holy Land to one of the groups of hands in the world. I can't remember now. but it is clearly stated on behalf of Shoghi Effendi, written by a letter by the hands of the cause of God in the Holy Land. I don't have the reference with me. If you are anxious to get the exact words, please write to the Universal House of Justice that this Ali came to us and he told us thus and thus. He believes that there is such a letter. If there is such a letter, please send it to me, and they will send it to you.
What is the way to understand the history of the work of the Universal House of Justice since 1963? What books or messages should we read?
There is a book called Messages of the Universal House of Justice, 1963 to 1986. It's a big volume, white cover. You read that book. All your questions will be answered.
What is Daniel's prophecy about 1,335 days? How can it be explained? When was it fulfilled?
In the same book, around page 700, and look up the index, Daniel's prophecy in the index, and it will give you the page in that same book, which will show you the reference, will give you the reference.
There is next a series of questions related to individual guidance, including what are the main Baha'i books and documents we should read. We've been inspired a great deal. How can we keep this inspiration when we go away from here? We've learnt a lot in Acuto. How do we tell the community about it without appearing to be a fanatic? How do we control this inspiration?
All right.
Individual development.
Enough. Okay. What Baha'i books to read? Shoghi Effendi used to attach a great deal of importance to Kitab-e-Iran, to some answered questions. He attached a great deal of importance to Kitab-e-Iran and to some answered questions. We have to read these two books at least ourselves and master them. God Passes By itself, to me, is a must for every Baha'i. So history, the dawn breakers, he often used to say that it was impossible to be able to teach the cause properly without reading the dawn breakers, Nabil's narrative. So we have to read, we have to accustom ourselves to reading. I think one of the problems of the Baha'is in many countries of the world is we do not read. We buy the book, and we're very proud about buying the book, and we put it on the shelf, and we say, well, a time will come when I will go and read it. And we never have the time, and we do not read it. And we just keep it there, and we look at it, and sometimes we dust it. Now, the question of how to keep the inspiration that you say you received here. My dear friends, I have told you, don't condition your actions, your services, upon the services of others. Be inspired by them, yes, but don't make it conditional that others should arise so that I will arise. The fact that others are not doing it doesn't mean anything. Just as our faith should not be conditioned by anybody's faith, our deeds should not be conditioned by the deeds or misdeeds of others. When you go back, I think you can go and tell your local spiritual assembly that you've just come back from Acuto, and maybe the friends would be interested in hearing a report from you as to where you have been and what you have done. And they may allow time for you at the 19-day feast to say something. But apart from what you may share with others about these sessions we had together, I think I would like to produce the overall remedy of all diseases. You teach the cause. Yeah. You go and resolve before you leave, decide that you're going to become a teacher of the cause of God. However weak you may feel you are, go and from day one, don't put it till tomorrow. Start from day one. Start teaching the cause. Think, pray. Pray that God will send you receptive souls. While you are here, before you go there, that God will send you receptive souls, that you will have the opportunity every day to mention the name of Baha'u'llah once. That is the cure-all for everything. Become teachers of the cause. Cast away your fears. Cast away your timidity, as Shoghi Effendi says. Put your trust in Him. Open your mouth. Speak. Become an instrument. Become a channel of the Spirit. You will allow this water of life to reach other souls. And you, becoming a vehicle, becoming a channel, you will benefit yourself. It will bring you to life. If you are withered, you come to life, because the Spirit is coming through you now into others. The bed of the river is itself enriched by the water of the river until it reaches the field, and the field is waiting for that water.
There are a group of questions which come straight away from that idea of being instruments under free will and determinism at the end here. These are all connected to this idea. They're asking, we're all instruments of God, how can this be connected with free will? How can we be doing anything special if we're pawns merely in His hands? How do we explain this to non-Baha'is? How do we understand the freedom of choice in the major plan of God if we're just pawns? And finally, if there are two kinds of tests, it shakes my understanding if we don't, etc.
First of all, let me explain to you about pawns. I have been misunderstood here. When Shoghi Effendi speaks about that we are pawns, he's not talking about you and me being pawns. He's talking about peoples and nations being pawns in the hands of Baha'u'llah on this chessboard. In other words, he's moving the nations of the world in a manner to ensure the triumph of his cause. This is what he is saying. You are not pawns. Free will is with you. It is in your own hand, in your own grasp. You decide your own fate, your own destiny, your own path. If you arise, then He will use you. If you do not arise, He will not use you. And you should arise selflessly. You should arise with pure motive. Selfless means to have pure intentions. A pure heart means to have pure intentions. Create in me, O God, a pure heart. Purity of heart, which Baha'u'llah says, my first counsel is this: possess a pure, radiant heart. This purity of heart means purity of motive. It means, why am I serving? I must ask myself, why am I serving? Am I serving so that people will recognize it, will notice it, will praise me, will elect me, let us say, to the local spiritual assembly, will appoint me to this committee or that committee? Is this the reason why I am serving the cause? If it is, I am wasting my life. If I am serving, if I am taking a step here or there, it should be for Him. This is selflessness. To put myself aside, to only focus my thoughts on His good pleasure. If He is pleased, if He will smile, that's all I need. That's all I know and all I need to know. This is purity of motive. This is selflessness. Do it for Him. In the path of His love. We obey Him for His love. As an act of love. Not for anything else. This is selflessness.
It's now almost 11:30.
Yes. What is...
If you don't mind, there is just one set of questions here on wealth and poverty, which are completely different.
Different,
yes. And then I think that's, you've just about covered everything.
Okay.
The questions on wealth and poverty and money-related issues and the fund.
Yes.
First of all, there's several questions about begging. When someone is begging and needs money to eat, is it allowed to give him some food? You mentioned it as forbidden.
Let me do this. Yes, it's all right to give him some food and give him some clothes. But when you give food and clothes, make sure that it doesn't become a habit, that you don't prevent that person from becoming self-supporting himself. Because the purpose of giving charity is just so that the present needs will be covered. But then it becomes a constant thing, then we are helping this person to become a beggar for the rest of his life, and that is bad. So, but of course, if somebody is in need, for the immediate need, we give it, naturally, food, clothes, and so on. The point, remember, what we have to remember is that Baha'u'llah is saying that we should not help people in a manner that they will make begging their profession. That is the line. That is the red line. Yeah. Okay.
There's two questions about the Huququllah.
Yes. Ask it.
How wealthy do you have to be so as to give the Huququllah, and also for what purposes? Please give examples. Is the money of the Huququllah used? What is the international fund used for?
Yes. As I was saying yesterday, giving to the fund, there's no exception. Even the poor has to give to the fund. But I was saying that for the Huququllah, there is an exemption. And the exemption, as you remember in the Kitab Aqdas, is 19 misqals of gold. If up to 19 misqals of gold, if you have less than that, you don't have to pay Huququllah. Now, in order to calculate your 19 misqals of gold, 19 misqals of gold is equal to 69.19 grams of gold. Now the price of gold changes, fluctuates almost from month to month, even from day to day. You have to calculate. You go to internet and you find out the price of gold. And it's possible to do this these days. You don't need to go to a bank. And you find out the price of gold and what's the price in euros or in dollars of 69 grams of gold, 0.19, nearly 70 grams. And for that, Baha'u'llah says, at any time, whatever is the value of gold at any time during the dispensation of Baha'u'llah, those people are exempt. What the Huququllah is used for by the House of Justice, it is used for international collaboration. For example, any national spiritual assembly in the world that needs support, they give to them. Any place where they want to buy a teaching institute at this time, they don't have the money to buy the property, the Universal House of Justice uses the Huququllah for them. Whenever there is any problem, for example, there is a catastrophe, you can be sure that in this, tsunami event of the tidal wave, you can be sure that the House of Justice has sent contributions on behalf of the Baha'i international community to international organizations such as United Nations and other institutions for the help of the people. Then they help the teaching work. They help the counselors throughout the world. They help the movement of pioneers whenever there is any need for pioneers. The building of constructions, for example, the temple in Chile will need a great deal of support. Naturally, the time will come when the House of Justice will call on all of us to make special contributions to the Chilean temple. But they themselves will make contributions directly to Chile. They are making contributions now for the expenses of the architect, for the expenses of the National Assembly itself, in making surveys of the land, in finding out what can be done with the government. All these have required expenses, and they are continuously spending money. They spend money for the staff at the World Center. They spend all this money for the construction of the Ark and the buildings on the Ark, as you know. So there is continuous call on the Universal House of Justice for these expenses. And whenever there is any need, of course, they will turn to us and say, we have a crisis, and we have to help them in the crisis. We hope that there will be no crisis once again, because there was a crisis at the time when we were building the Ark, and the House of Justice made a special appeal to the world, to the Baha'i world, to help. Yes?
The last question about money is, why shouldn't non-Baha'is give money to the fund if they do it with their heart and in a spirit of self-sacrifice?
The institutions of the faith do not prevent non-Baha'is from making contributions. If somebody wants to make a contribution to the fund, they don't say, oh, don't pay. They don't say that. They will tell him, we cannot accept money directly for the work of the faith, because this is something that we have to do as a gift to humanity. However, if you insist upon giving us money, we will take it, but we will use it for charitable purposes, for humanitarian projects, not directly for the work of the faith. The work of the faith has to be sustained, has to be covered by contributions of Baha'is themselves. But if you insist, we will certainly accept this and will give you a receipt. Thank you very much. But you can be sure that we will make 100% sure that this money is spent properly for charitable, for humanitarian purposes throughout the world.
There is a couple of questions which ask you to give very concrete examples about fighting the ego. You have already spoken about the ego, but there are two questions in particular. One question is actually the answer to another question. If you wouldn't mind, I would read it for you. This is on 675 and 776. So the first question is it possible to deepen on the topic of enemies within? And the previous question is, please explain the difference between the fear we have to throw away and the fear of God. So it seems to me one...
First, on the second question, the difference between the fear that we have to throw away and the fear of God. The fear that we have to throw away is our own failing, our own timidity, our own unreliance upon our own weaknesses. We are afraid that if we teach the cause, people will say, oh, this man or this woman, they don't know what they are talking about. We don't like to hear that. So we call it, we say, I'm not doing this because I don't want to disgrace the faith of Baha'u'llah. Therefore I'm not teaching. But what I am really afraid of is for people to say, this Ali does not know what he's talking about. You know, he's a fool. I don't want to hear that. I don't want to be humiliated. So it's really basically myself and ego which is playing a role here. I should say, even if they think I'm a fool, I'm going to teach. Because I know that Baha'u'llah is going to help me. And if I get to a point where I can't answer him, I'll say, all right, give me time, I'll give you the answer tomorrow. And I'll go and work through the night and meet Baha'is and ask them, what is the answer to this question? And I'll go the next day to him or to her and give my answer. There is always, always the possibility. That is this fear. We should not fear anything, anywhere. We should only fear itself. That's the only thing we have to fear. To get rid of it and transmute our fear into courage, into confidence. Because, as I told you, we're not alone. Now, the other fear is the fear of God. The fear of God has always been equal to the love of God. The fear of God means I want to avoid His displeasure. That's why I fear Him. I love Him so much, I don't want Him to be angry with me. I don't want to do anything that will displease Him. That is the fear of God. It's a beautiful thing. It is equal, as I told you, to the love of God. We should never ever abandon the fear of God. In fact, as I told you before, Baha'u'llah says, fear God and He will teach you. He will instruct you. Fear of God is a good thing. We become humble before Him. We become lowly before Him. Then we receive.
Do you wish to answer this personal experience one?
Did I finish the questions here?
You really did.
I did? Right. I trust her, it's okay. The last question is this. Could you please share the honorable experience of that immemorable day of the election of the Universal House of Justice? That was, it took place, I think somebody must have referred to this before, maybe Violette did. The election of the Universal House of Justice took place, as you know, in the Holy Land. And there were delegates from all over national spiritual assemblies. Was it 56 or 57 national assemblies who sent their delegates to Haifa? And these delegates, it was so moving to see them go to the shrines and pray for guidance. It was the very first time that national assemblies were electing the Universal House of Justice. They were going to the shrines and praying for guidance. Silently, they were going. And just before the first day of the convention. And then the convention was held in the Master's house in Haifa. And it wasn't about 600 people, 700 people. It was only 200, a little over 200 people. It was possible to house them, put enough chairs in the main hall and the adjacent rooms to the main hall of the house of the Master. They put chairs all over the place. And again, prayer after prayer after prayer was chanted or read. And then in total silence, complete silence, these poor members of National Spiritual Assemblies sat down, held their pen and their paper, and with trembling hands, quietly, they wrote these names that they felt would be members of the future Universal House of Justice. And it took, I think, about maybe 45 minutes to 1 hour of complete silence in the hall. And then the ballots by national assemblies. Every national assembly alphabetically was called upon to stand up. The members would stand up and they would go and drop their ballots. Of course, there were some absent members, and the absent members had already sent their ballots by mail. And so whenever there was an absent member, already his ballot was there. The envelope would be open and cut, and his ballot would be removed and put in the box. And then that night, all the delegates, the tellers were appointed by the hands of the cause of God in the Holy Land. These tellers, there were about 20 of them, remained in the Master's house and worked through the night in order to tally the ballots. And in the morning, Ruhiya Khanum came down from her room, from her bedroom, and I think it is for Violette to tell us these stories. It shows you the integrity of Ruhiya Khanum. Ruhiya Khanum came down, and the chief teller, of course, was there, and he thought maybe Ruhiya Khanum would want to know the result of the election. She said, no. We will go to the hall at the convention. When you announce it, I will hear it. She did not want to claim any special rights and privileges for herself. So everybody, we went to the hall, and at the appropriate time, the chief teller stood up, and he was a member of the National Assembly of the British Isles, by the way, and he gave out the names. And the names were, as every name was given, the friends were asked not to clap until the very end. And then the names were read, and each member went to the the stage, and it was a great, great moment for the delegates to see this institution for the first time. There are many, many tears, those who are on the stage, and many tears in the eyes of those who are in the audience. And when the members, after the member who had the highest number of votes said a few words, appropriate words, to the convention, then the members came down from the stage to sit in their proper seats. But I remember something very wonderful that Mr. Samandari did. There were a few steps just like these, few steps leading to the stage here. He was standing at the end of the stairs. He was the hand of the cause. He had 9 envelopes in his hand. And in each envelope he had put in, he was a very good calligrapher himself, beautiful handwriting. He had made some extracts from the writings of Baha'u'llah about the station of the Universal House of Justice, about the functions of the members of the Universal House of Justice in Persian that he had extracted and written in beautiful handwriting. He had made 9 copies and put them in this envelope for each member. And as each member came down, he very sweetly and humbly and lovingly offered this envelope to each member. That was a very sweet moment to see Mr. Samandari, a Samandari who had been in the presence of Baha'u'llah, a Samandari who had been in the presence of Abdul Baha, a Samandari who was in the presence of Shoghi Effendi, a Samandari who was the hand of the cause of God himself, and throughout the interregnum had played a major role in the work of the hands of the cause of God. We should be very grateful to Baha'u'llah that he has given us this institution. Shoghi Effendi calls it a haven for humanity. He calls it a fortress for humanity. And the last refuge of a tottering civilization. These are the titles that he has conferred upon the Universal House of Justice. We should be very grateful to the founder of our faith that he has given us this wonderful institution which will guide the Baha'i world to the end of this dispensation. Thank you very much.